let me just bring in Charlie Rowley, let's say, who's been with us all morning, and Ralph Schoellhammer. Ralph, do you have a culture war battle going on in Austria as well?
I think we do, and I think we have this culture war going on all over the West. And if we really kind of want to dive down what the essence of the culture war is, the main question is it still okay to be a patriot regarding of wherever you are? And you saw this a couple of days back when I was informed that apparently singing Rule Britannia makes people feel uncomfortable.
Apparently. This is the cellist who played
I
Prince Harry's
I just want to say one thing. Without the spirit behind Rule Britannia, all of us would having this conversation in German. I mean, I would probably not mind, but I think the world and the British are very happy that this is not the case.
Yeah. I mean, I was saying earlier, if Britain did still rule the waves, the world would be a very good place. But this is the thing, isn't it? It's like we're celebrating our amazing past, this country. Moving to end slavery, fighting against Hitler. Fighting against fascism and standing firm against communism. Both ideologies which have killed tens and tens and tens of millions of people, and we're supposed to be embarrassed and ashamed of it.
No, that's really the problem. I think there is a patriotism-shaped hole in the soul of Britain, and we try to fill it with all kind of nonsense, from transgenderism to the climate cult, to all these things.
Yeah.
These are attempts to give meaning to life, because what was the meaning for a long time, right? Being part of a community, of the British nation, feeling yourself as, Abraham Lincoln called it the chords of history, of memory, that you're part of this larger flow of history. We are embarrassed by it, we are ashamed of it, so we look for alternatives. I would say that also kind of connects to the debate about education. Right? If young children, if young people, young men especially, don't feel that patriotism and nationalism is worthwhile, they will turn to something else. Right?
Yep.
Can be climate, can be absurdities like, you identify as a cat, or if you have a migrant background, kind of returning to the beliefs of the community.
You need to give people something. Charlie, really, don't you think that's so crucial, isn't it? Because Keir Starmer talking about, stoking culture wars, but actually a lot of this is about national identity. It's being proud of where you are and what you're from and what your country has achieved. It doesn't mean you think your country's perfect.
Exactly, and it's that history that stays with you as a nation, and this history that, with us today, means that we are fighting the good fight with our partners in Ukraine against the tyranny, against Russia. That's only because of our strength, because of our history, because of fighting those wars in the past. And you're absolutely right. We'd be speaking German. We'd probably be speaking goodness knows what before the Second World War if we hadn't had the great institution, great history that we've got in our country.
I want to stand up and wave a flag now. I'm feeling very bored. But we had to get a guest in from Webster University in Vienna to say that for us. Wish our own politicians would do a bit more of that. Ralph, thank you very much indeed. Well, look, I wanted to talk to you specifically about Britain's climate watchdog privately admitting that their net zero recommendations were based on data from just 1 year. Now, I mean, it's bad enough that the climate change claims are often made about any individual event. We've got Storm Isha today. Oh, got loads and loads of storms. It's all due to climate change. It's not global warming anymore, is it? It's climate change. So anything that happens in the weather at all, if it's too dry, if it's too wet, if it's too windy, not windy enough, too hot, too cold, it's all down to climate change. Taking data from just one event is bad enough. Taking data from 1 year when you're looking at what our energy needs are, the amount of wind or solar that could realistically be provided as part of our energy mix. I mean, this is tantamount to, this is an abject failure of public policy making, isn't it?
No, it's absurd in another way as well, because one of the claims, at least of the climate change alarmists, is that weather will become less predictable.
Yeah.
So using previous weather patterns makes absolutely no sense, because their claim is that the weather is going to be different. So if you say we plan, for example, how much wind is there going to be for the wind turbines in 10 years, but you also claim that we don't know what the wind is going to be in 10 years, it makes no sense. But the whole edifice...
It's almost like we didn't use wind and solar as the backup, as the basis of our energy needs, because they were unpredictable, because they're down to nature as opposed to down to us, say, building a gas-powered station or a nuclear power station where man is in control of nature. It's almost like there was a reason why we did that, Ralph.
Yeah, as I said, I think it's more psychological than it is, driven by an energy policy or even by environmental concerns. But the whole edifice is crumbling down. The head of Siemens recently, who is one of the world's largest wind turbine producers, said, we have to accept the fact that if you want to have the energy transition, everything is going to get more expensive. And the only truly reliable form of electricity production next to nuclear is natural gas. So slowly but surely, everybody comes out of the woodworks and says, well, what we have told you over the last couple of years was not entirely true.
Yeah.
And I think that is the big issue here.
Yeah.
Because we were told two promises. Made two promises. We were told we can save the planet and everything is going to be cheaper. And now kind of one of those two pillars is crumbling. So it's got to be more expensive.
But apparently the public are completely in support of this. Of course, the polling is very, very clear. People go, are you worried about climate change? People go, yeah, because you're a bad person if you're not worried about climate change. I am so happy to admit I am not worried about climate change in any way at all. But it's a perfectly legitimate point of view, but the key thing is here, when you ask people about specific policies, are you happy to have to, not use your washing machine in the evenings because you can't afford the energy for it? No, I'm not. Are you happy to not own your own car because of the energy output? No, or have a car that's unreliable that you can't charge up or takes too long to charge. Are you happy to pay a lot more for your energy? Are you happy not to fly or to pay surcharges to fly abroad on holiday? Funnily enough, when you ask people those questions, ULEZ, extra charges, funnily enough, people say, no, I don't actually agree with that. So people pay a lot of lip service and play along, but they don't really agree with any of it. And also because they're, frankly, the British public, too clever to think that any of this stuff will make a difference. Because you said there are two bits. One's not true. It's not going to be cheaper. Second is it's also not going to save the planet.
Well, and there's a third one, right? There's a third one, because in the end, if we would really want to do all those steps that we are promised or that we are said that have to be done to reach the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal, you would have to tell millions of people in the West that they have to accept to get poorer, and you would have to tell billions in the rest of the world that they will never get wealthy. Both sides of that equation will not go along with it.
And we know that in India, China, elsewhere, they're saying no thanks.
But then you are left, and this is kind of the footnote that they don't want to talk about it. If you want to do something that nobody wants to do, you have to force people. And this is my biggest threat. There is an authoritarian streak within the climate movement that gets entirely ignored or is kind of downplayed. But at the end, you want people to do something that they don't want to do. So how do you get them to do it? By force. And that worries me almost more than anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is what is underpinning all of this. Whenever I see these adverts been on in the last few weeks about, hey, and they've got Olympic athletes and Paralympians saying, oh, I'm just waiting for the moment when I can put my laundry on because it's cheaper, and I'll do some building work at home, DIY because it's cheaper. And everyone's going, oh, isn't it great? You can get cheaper energy at this time. No, it's the opposite of that. If you've got a smart meter, don't get a smart meter, by the way. It's so they can allow you to charge you more for energy at peak times. But well-off people aren't going to have to worry about putting on the washing machine or using a drill. They're not going to have to worry about it. But people on lower incomes, well, we're a first world country in the 21st century, and we're basically not only allowing it to happen, but saying it's a good thing that we should make it harder for people on low incomes to use basic mod cons of modern life, like washing machines and dishwashers, at key times of the day. That's obscene, and it's laughable, and it should be laughed at by the electorate. Saying, I don't bloody well think so.
And it's even worse, because it's not just that you low living standards, but you lose, as we see now with steel factories in Great Britain, you lose jobs.
Talk to us about Tata Steel, because there's been, £500 million of subsidies from the UK government to keep Tata Steel jobs in Port Talbot. 3,000 jobs are going to go because they are converting their steel-making works into a sort of a greener works. Tell us what that involves and why. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it's hypothetically possible, right? It's an electric arc furnace. So you move the energy used is going to be electricity and not as it originally was, for example, gas or coal. So that's a nice step to do. That's
but isn't coal a crucial part of the process of creating steel?
It is crucial, right? You could replace it with other things, but the bigger problem, of course, is you need a society, you need a government that actually wants to keep heavy industry in its country. And I think this is the problem here. We have the same debate in Scotland, I think just a couple of weeks ago, about a refinery that was commissioned in 1924. So we have debates on should we keep it running, should we not keep it running? You should pick new ones. I mean, I say this every time. One of the big advantages of Brexit could have been that you could be autonomous in your industrial policy, and you could abandon idiotic regulations that came from Brussels in the past. But in many ways, Britain has overtaken Brussels in idiotic regulations. This is the part I never understood about Brexit.
But also the extraordinary thing is this idea like, oh, well, do we need steel to be produced here? Because Wales, apparently, the BBC, they were loving this. The BBC website was saying how wonderful it was that Wales was going to cut their carbon emissions by a fifth by getting rid of this horrible, dirty steelworks at Port Talbot, its old school works. But don't worry, because you can import steel from other countries. Oh, and how do they make steel and ship it across the world? We're using fossil fuels, using coal to make it in China, shipping it across on oil tankers. I mean, your net impact, if that is the concern, and it's not mine, by the way, if that is your concern, you're actually increasing carbon emissions. But also, small point, we live in a very uncertain world right now. You're not just an economist, you're a political theorist. We have got, war in Europe. Putin, fighting in Europe, having invaded Ukraine. We've got the Middle East could go up in flames at any time. We've got the threat from China against Taiwan, a good ally of ours. Are we going to step up there? We need to be able to make steel. We saw during 2020, during lockdowns, that this reliance on international trade, last minute, just in time deliveries and everything. Well, that all went kaput. It's quite routine now to go to the supermarket and see blank, empty shelves because that supply hasn't arrived. Well, you know what? You might not be able to get tangerines, but don't worry, you can buy apples. But you need steel, and you need it every day. We need to be making this stuff in our country.
But you need one thing even more. And I had a conversation about this yesterday, and I never got so many emails from British viewers. And there is a sense among the British public that nobody would be willing to fight for Britain. So it's not just about having ships and tanks. There's a sense within the broader British public that the current government, and probably also the next government, has priorities, is not prioritizing its own people, it's prioritizing everything else. And this is a huge problem. Like, the people feel detached from their governments, they feel detached from the ruling class. So exactly as you're saying...
Well, they're not proud. This comes into that conversation about Rule Britannia. They're not proud of what they don't want to stand for what we... But again, if we think that, we believe in the nation state, apparently when it's Ukraine, we do believe in the nation state, that we should be willing to fight for it. And that is going to involve having ships, having helicopters, having planes. Charlie Rowley, what do you make of what Ralph's had to say?
Well, to tie all this together, you're absolutely right. The British, great British mentality is to roll up your sleeves when there's a problem and do something about it. So you have to become self-sufficient.
We used to have that mentality.
We used to have exactly. And so when there are new oil and gas licenses in Scotland because we can't be self-sufficient. We can't rely on Russia to import our gas and oil. So we have to be self-sufficient in that sense. We have to have an industrial strategy that's fit for the 21st century. But we also can't have the likes of Extinction Rebellion or Just Stop Oil on the streets, bringing chaos to traffic, stopping ambulances, getting to people that they need to, because they have one cause, one agenda that's usually lefty anyway, to bring down the government, to bring down good old-fashioned British values of people, common sense that would just roll up their sleeves, get the job done, do what needs to be, say what needs to be said, do what needs to be done, and get this country
exactly. And again, Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil. I mean, again, you mentioned it, they're very authoritarian. This is about forcing people. This is about telling people, you shouldn't be eating meat, you shouldn't be flying, you shouldn't be having a car, you shouldn't be having industry. They want this. I don't think most people understand that to deliver what they think will deliver, which, by the way, will not have any impact on our climate, on the world's climate, or even any meaningful impact on carbon emissions across the globe, will involve us going back to a standard of living which most people really don't want, and will preclude people currently living in poverty in the third world from ever having the sort of standard of living which I want everybody to have: washing machines and telephones and heating or aircon and clean water. That stuff requires fossil fuels.
I agree, but what you said, Charlie, right, you cannot pick and choose. And what we are currently doing is kind of a new paganism. We sacrifice our girls on the altar of multiculturalism, we sacrifice our industry on the altar of net zero, and we sacrifice our education on this weird idea of equity. And these things all go together. This is not like, and this is the problem on the right, you cannot pick and choose. Like, either you stand with British values and British history or not. You cannot say, oh, the British values is rolling up your sleeves, and then you say, oh, but singing the anthem makes me uncomfortable. It's either all or nothing. And again, I make this my life's work to remind the British it's a country that stood on the right side of history anytime it counted. Unfortunately, I come from a country that didn't. I come from a country that didn't. Like, I come from a country which unfortunately very often stood on the wrong side. So it is absolutely justified and a good thing to be proud of Britain, and people who live here can be grateful. It's a privilege to be here. I always feel honoured and privileged to be here, and if I can love Britain, I think the British can as well.
Yeah, I see, and I think most British people do. I mean, certainly, I think, younger people are being told that our country is terrible, and again, and the world is terrible, and things like, and whereas actually we have been a force for good more than we have been a force for. That doesn't mean everything we did during our years of empire was perfect. Of course, we did some terrible things, as did every empire. We now live in the age of the American empire. I mean, we've got the rise of China and India, and obviously There's still, European Union power as well. But fundamentally, America is by far the biggest economy, by far, by a long way, the biggest military. It is a seafaring nation as well. Obviously, what happens in America, has massive impact on the rest of the world. We've got the American next presidential election. It's looking pretty much almost a dead cert now. We will see another rerun of the 2020 election of Biden versus Trump. Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, dropped out yesterday from that race and basically, interestingly, quoted Churchill, he said, although apparently a quote that wasn't actually Churchill, anything that Churchill ever said or written. But he has dropped out. What do you think a Trump presidency will mean for, and let's say, the climate change, the net zero issue, which I think is, we are basically going into one of the most terrifying ages of our time in terms of Russia, Islamist extremism and China's flexing of their muscles, basically saying to the West, we're going to tie your hands behind your back and then you're going to try and fight these countries, because we are basically going to have to fight them economically, military, however. What do you think a Trump presidency means for net zero and things, but also what does a Trump presidency mean for the willingness of the West to stand up for its values?
Well, I think on policy, the first Trump administration was excellent. The personality of Trump has always been an issue, but I guess you have to be a little bit of a madman if you want to do things entirely different than from how it has been done before.
You're not a Trump fan as such.
Well, I'm also not a fan of my plumber, but I want him to get the job done. And for me, a president is the same thing, right? I don't need a personality cult. I don't need to love Trump, but if I sense that he gets the job done, then I'm happy. And what we see, we have to be very honest here, starting with the retreat from Afghanistan under Joe Biden, basically the entire international order has unraveled. And one of the reasons is because whoever it is, from the Houthis to the Taliban to Iran, right, if they sense weakness, they start to act upon it. And one can say whatever one wants about Trump. Trump has many qualities in the good sense or in the bad sense, but he doesn't seem like somebody who's shies away from making unpopular decisions. And the other thing is, Britain and Europe, we got way too comfortable under American protection.
Oh, yeah.
So if Trump goes in and says, I'm not going to leave NATO, but you guys have to pay up as promised, I think that's a good step.